You've been told the first hour after an EMP is about action. Get to your supplies, secure your perimeter, execute your plan. But that advice will get you killed. Or worse, it will get you noticed. Because while you're moving, while you're doing exactly what every prepper fantasy taught you to do, you're broadcasting capability in a world that has just gone dark. And capability draws attention. Always. The truth most people miss is this. The first 60 minutes aren't tactical. They're diagnostic. This is the window where everyone else shows you who they really are. The panicked, the frozen, the opportunists already moving toward advantage. Your job isn't to join them. It's to watch. To position yourself psychologically before you position yourself physically. Because the person who acts first rarely wins. The person who reads the room, understands the pattern, and moves with clarity, that's who survives the transition. Your gear doesn't matter if you don't understand the human terrain forming around you. And that terrain reveals itself fastest when you're still. In the first hour after an EMP, information doesn't come from a screen. It comes from watching people try to find a screen that still works. That difference between seeking information and observing the seekers is the gap where strategic advantage lives. Most people, even the prepared ones, will spend the first 20 minutes trying to confirm what just happened. They'll check their phone, try the car, look for someone in uniform. They're wired to wait for official word, for the news ticker, for someone to explain the disruption. This reflex doesn't disappear just because the grid does. It intensifies. The human mind resists anomaly. It wants pattern, authority, confirmation. So even when every device is dead, people will keep checking, keep asking, keep waiting for the system to tell them the system is gone. This is your window. While they're trying to verify, you're watching who moves with certainty and who doesn't. Who's asking questions and who's already acting on assumptions. Who defaults to leadership and who looks for someone to follow. That's intelligence you can't get from a broadcast. And it's intelligence with a short shelf life. Because once people accept the reality, once they stop seeking permission to believe what's happening, the behavioral patterns solidify. They become actors instead of revealers. The confusion phase closes. The strategic error most preppers make is assuming information means knowing what happened. They want confirmation. Was it an EMP? A solar flare? An attack? They treat the first hour like a research problem. But the cause is irrelevant to your immediate survival. What matters is the effect, and more specifically, the effect on the people around you. Are they calm or escalating? Cooperative or predatory? Waiting for instructions or taking initiative? You learn this by watching, not asking. Consider the psychology at work. In any crisis, people instinctively look to established hierarchies. They wait for the mayor to speak, for the police to give direction, for someone official to restore order. This is behavioral inertia. It's why, after a fire alarm, people finish their coffee before leaving. It's why, during evacuations, some wait in line, while others break windows. The system trains compliance. And compliance doesn't shut off the moment the system does. This is exploitable. Because while the majority is locked in a holding pattern, checking dead phones, clustering around anyone in uniform, waiting for clarity, you're gathering the only information that matters: the human map. Who are the threats? Who are the resources? Who will fold under pressure? And who's already operating on a different set of assumptions? The prepared individual who understands this doesn't waste time trying to confirm the scenario. They assume the worst case, act accordingly, and adjust only if proven wrong. They're not paralyzed by uncertainty, they're leveraging it. Because in the first hour, uncertainty is asymmetric. You may not know exactly what happened, but you know more than the person still staring at their phone. And that edge compounds. Information asymmetry isn't about having all the answers. It's about recognizing that most people are asking the wrong questions. They want to know what happened. You need to know what happens next. And the best predictor of what happens next is watching what people do when they think no one's in charge yet. The human brain is not built for novelty. It's built for pattern matching. When something breaks outside known parameters, the mind doesn't immediately accept it. It tries to fit the anomaly into the closest familiar framework. This is called recognition debt. And in the first hour after an MP, it's the tax nearly everyone pays. Even if you've studied MP scenarios, even if you've run drills and memorized checklists, your first instinct, when the car dies and the phone goes dark, won't be MP. It'll be dead battery, or local outage, or something's wrong with my device. The mind reaches for the mundane explanation first because the mundane has precedent. You've had a dead phone before. You haven't lived through a grid collapse. This cognitive lag is predictable. For most people, it takes 15 to 40 minutes before they even begin to consider that the disruption is widespread and systemic. That's 15 to 40 minutes of confusion, testing, retesting, asking neighbors, waiting for something to reboot. 15 to 40 minutes where they're cognitively frozen, trying to solve a small problem while a large one unfolds around them. If you're prepared, you have a narrow advantage here, but only if you recognize it's narrow. The window where you possess clarity that others lack is maybe 10, maybe 20 minutes. After that, enough people start connecting the dots. The questions get sharper. The panic begins. And once panic spreads, your informational edge collapses because everyone is operating in crisis mode simultaneously. The mistake the prepared make is spending that window on verification. They want to be sure, so they test another device. Try the landline. Walk to a neighbor's house. Ask if anyone else's car is working. This feels rational. It feels cautious. But it's recognition debt in disguise. You're delaying action to confirm what you should already be assuming. Here's the shift. Act as if it's real, and adjust only if proven otherwise. This inverts the default cognitive process. Instead of waiting for certainty before acting, you assume worst case and move accordingly. If you're wrong, you've lost nothing. Maybe some time, maybe some social credibility. If you're right, you've preserved the most valuable commodity in the first hour: decision speed. Because every minute you spend testing your hypothesis is a minute someone else is spending observing, positioning, or moving. And in a collapsing system, the cost of delayed action compounds faster than the cost of premature action. The person who leaves the grocery store at minute 5 gets out clean. The person who leaves at minute 30 is fighting through a crowd that just figured out the registers aren't coming back online. Recognition debt doesn't just slow you down, it traps you in the same behavioral loop as everyone else. You become part of the confused mass, indistinguishable from those who had no preparation at all. And the moment you're indistinguishable, you've lost your edge. The prepared individual who succeeds in the first hour isn't the one with the most knowledge. It's the one willing to act on incomplete information without freezing in the gap between suspicion and certainty. They don't need to know it's an MP. They just need to see enough indicators: multiple failures, widespread confusion, no official response, and move. Hesitation kills leverage, and leverage, once lost, doesn't come back. The first thing that disappears in an EMP isn't electricity, it's ambient safety. That invisible structure of assumptions, the force that keeps strangers polite, keeps intersections orderly, keeps people standing in line at the pharmacy instead of pushing through the door. It's not law, it's not morality. It's the collective belief that the system is watching, that consequences exist, that someone is in control. And the moment that belief cracks, space itself changes. Within the first 10 minutes, most environments still look normal. People are confused, but they're following patterns. They're standing at the crosswalk even though the light's out. They're waiting at the gas pump even though the card reader is dead. The muscle memory of civilization is still active. This is the confusion phase, and spatially, it's deceptive. Everything appears stable because behavior hasn't shifted yet, but the grid that enforced that behavior is already gone. Between 10 and 25 minutes, you start to see confirmation-seeking behavior play out in physical space. People cluster. They ask each other questions. Someone tries to direct traffic. Someone else walks into a store and asks the clerk what's happening, as if the clerk has answers. There's still an assumption of roles, that clerks know things, that drivers yield, that authority figures will appear and restore order. This phase is still relatively safe, but it's also when smart actors are repositioning. They're leaving the grocery store, not entering it. They're turning away from the hospital, not toward it, because they understand what comes next. Around 25 to 45 minutes, early panic begins. Not widespread chaos, just the leading edge. Someone realizes the ATM isn't coming back online. A driver gets aggressive at a four-way stop no one is regulating anymore. A parent with kids starts moving faster, more decisively, less apologetically. The spaces that seemed stable start to feel contested. The gas station isn't just crowded, it's tense. The pharmacy isn't just busy, it's a pressure point. People aren't asking questions anymore, they're making demands. And when those demands aren't met, you see the first fractures in civility. By 45 to 60 minutes, you enter the early window of predatory opportunism. This isn't full collapse. It's not looting or violence at scale. It's subtler. It's the person who takes something off a shelf and walks out without paying, testing whether anyone stops them. It's the person who cuts in front of someone weaker and dares them to object. It's the moment someone realizes the rules are optional now, and they're right, because there's no one to enforce them. No cameras recording, no police responding, no manager calling security. This progression happens faster in some places than others. A grocery store in a dense urban area reaches panic faster than a rural gas station. A hospital emergency room fractures faster than a suburban intersection. But the pattern is universal: confusion, confirmation seeking, panic, opportunism. And every phase changes how you should read the space you're in. An intersection at minute 5 is just an intersection. At minute 40, it's a choke point, where someone makes a bad decision and everyone behind them reacts. A grocery store at minute 10 is a resource. At minute 50, it's a flashpoint, where ambient safety has fully collapsed, and the only thing preventing escalation is that not enough people have realized it yet. Here's what most people miss. The first hour is not the beginning of societal collapse. It's the last moment of ambient order. The system is already gone, but behavior hasn't caught up. There's a lag between infrastructure failing and people acting like it has. That lag is your window. This is when you move, or this is when you lock down. There is no middle option. You don't wait to see how bad it gets, because by the time it looks bad, positioning is over. The person who leaves the store at minute 20 gets out clean. The person still deciding at minute 50 is getting caught in the cascade. Spatial awareness in the first hour isn't about knowing where your supplies are. It's about knowing where the pressure points are forming and being somewhere else before they break. Most people think an EMP means immediate resource scarcity. No water, no food, no fuel. That's wrong. In the first hour, resources are still everywhere. The grocery store shelves are full. The gas station tanks are full. Municipal water pressure is still functioning. The crisis isn't scarcity, it's access paralysis. The resources exist, but the systems that let you access them are gone. ATMs don't work. You can't pull cash. Gas pumps don't work. You can't fuel your vehicle, even if the tank beneath you holds 10,000 gallons. Card readers are dead. So even if a store wanted to sell you something, the transaction layer is gone. Communication is severed. You can't call your family. You can't coordinate. You can't confirm whether someone else is safe or stranded. The infrastructure is intact, but the interface is offline. And for most people, the interface is the only part they know how to use. This creates a paradox. People with preparation, people with supplies stored at home, people who did everything right are now stranded. At work, at the store, across town, unable to access what they spent years accumulating. Their supplies are irrelevant because they're not where their supplies are. And in the first hour, that gap becomes unbridgeable fast. The prepper obsession with quantity misses this entirely. They focus on how much food, how much water, how many rounds. But volume doesn't matter if you can't reach it. The person with a year's worth of supplies 30 miles away has less effective capacity than the person with 3 days' worth in arm's reach. Positioning beats quantity. Mobility beats stockpiling. And in the first 60 minutes, the person who understands what fails first can exploit gaps everyone else hasn't noticed yet. Here's what fails immediately. Anything that requires electronic payment, remote authorization, or networked communication. That means you can't buy, you can't withdraw, you can't verify, you can't coordinate. But here's what doesn't fail immediately. Mechanical locks, gravity-fed water systems, cash transactions if both parties agree, and physical access to goods not behind electronic security. This creates narrow windows of opportunity, and those windows close fast. In the first 20 minutes, a small store with a manual cash register might still complete transactions, if the owner is present and willing. By minute 40, they've probably stopped, either from distrust or pressure from other customers. In the first 30 minutes, a gas station with an older mechanical pump might still work, if you know how to bypass the electronic controls. By minute 50, someone else has figured it out, or the owner has locked it down. The strategically aware individual isn't trying to get everything. They're identifying what they can access right now that others can't, or haven't realized they can. They're not standing in line at the ATM, hoping it comes back online. They recognize the ATM is dead and adjust. They're not trying to top off a full tank. They're calculating whether the time, exposure, and risk are worth it. Because here's the other edge. While everyone else is trying to make the old system work, you're operating in the new reality. They're waiting for the card reader to reboot. You've already moved on. They're asking the clerk when the phones will be back. You've already left the store. That cognitive and physical separation between people trying to restore the old normal and people adapting to the new abnormal is the gap where advantage lives. The first hour isn't about hoarding. It's about positioning and access. The person who's already home has won. The person who's mobile, aware, and not dependent on electronic systems has options. The person who's stranded, waiting for infrastructure to return or trying to access resources through offline channels, has already lost time they won't get back. The grid dependency illusion is believing that when the grid fails, everything fails. It doesn't. What fails is your ability to interact with systems the way you've been trained to. And the faster you stop trying to make dead systems work, the faster you can operate in the gaps they leave behind. Civilized behavior isn't a character trait. It's a condition maintained by functioning systems. And in the first hour after an MP, You get to watch that condition degrade in real time. There's a tipping point, usually around 30 minutes, where courtesy collapse begins. It's not dramatic. It's not violent. Yet. It's subtle. Someone stops saying, "Excuse me." Someone cuts in a line and no one objects. Someone takes something and walks out, testing whether anyone stops them. These are micro-transgressions, but they're diagnostic. They tell you the social contract is unraveling. At minute 10, a gas station still feels normal. People are confused, maybe frustrated, but they're still performing civility. They're waiting their turn, apologizing when they bump into someone, asking the attendant polite questions. The roles are still active: customer, clerk, neighbor. Everyone is still pretending the rules apply because no one is certain they don't. By minute 50, the same gas station is a different environment. Someone is trying to manually operate a pump. Another person is demanding the register be opened. A driver blocks the exit, refusing to move until they get what they came for. No one is apologizing. No one is waiting. The assumption of shared norms has evaporated. It's not chaos, it's the leading edge of it. And the people still operating on minute 10 logic are the ones getting walked over. This shift happens because morality, as most people practice it, is a luxury sustained by abundance and enforcement. When both vanish, behavior reverts to something older and more pragmatic. Not everyone becomes predatory, but everyone becomes more selfish. The margins tighten. The benefit of the doubt disappears. Strangers stop being neutral. They become either obstacles or opportunities. The belief that good people stay good under pressure is a comforting lie. Good people stay good when being good costs them nothing. When it costs them safety, resources, or positioning, most people adjust. They don't think of it as becoming bad. They think of it as adapting. And they're not wrong. The person who waits in line while others push ahead isn't virtuous. They're just slower to recognize the rules changed. Here's the strategic reality. If you're still in public space at minute 50, you're already behind. The courtesy collapse isn't something you navigate. It's something you avoid by being gone before it starts. Because once people stop pretending, once the micro-transgressions become macro, your options narrow fast. You can't de-escalate someone who's already decided consequences don't exist. You can't reason with someone operating under a different social contract than you are. The actor who understands this doesn't wait for proof. They see the early signs. The first person who doesn't apologize. The first person who takes without asking. And they recognize them as leading indicators. They don't stay to see how bad it gets. They don't assume people will hold it together. They position accordingly. Because they understand this. The 30-minute mark isn't when things fall apart. It's when the fall becomes visible. Courtesy collapse doesn't mean everyone becomes a threat. It means you can't assume anyone isn't. And in the first hour, that assumption is the difference between positioning and exposure. The person who anticipated it is already somewhere else. The person who waited for proof is now making decisions in an environment where the rules no longer apply, and no one is pretending they do. The most dangerous thing you can do in the first hour is know too much. Not because knowledge is bad, but because knowledge creates decision trees, and decision trees require data. And when you're waiting for data to confirm which branch to follow, you're not moving. You're standing still, running scenarios in your head while the world shifts around you. This is the prepared person's failure mode, overthinking. They've studied EMP effects, they've memorized checklists, they've run tabletop exercises and planned for variations. So when the event happens, they don't act, they diagnose. They're waiting for the confirmatory signal, the right indicator, the data point that tells them which scenario they're in so they can execute the corresponding plan. But reality doesn't announce itself cleanly. And while they're waiting for clarity, the opportunist, who knows nothing but assumes everything, is already moving. Here's the mechanism. Prepared individuals build mental models. If X happens, I do Y. The problem is, real-world disruptions don't present as clean variables. The car dies, but is it the battery, the EMP, or something else? The phone goes dark, but is it network congestion, a local outage, or a grid failure? Every ambiguity adds friction. Every unknown variable becomes a reason to wait, test, and confirm before committing. This isn't cowardice, it's the burden of competence. The person who's never thought about MP scenarios doesn't hesitate because they don't have a framework. They just react. They see the car is dead. They start walking. No internal debate, no checklist, no branching logic. The prepared person, by contrast, has a checklist, and they're trying to match reality to it before they act. That's the paralysis. They're cognitively prepared, but behaviorally frozen. Contrast two archetypes. The prepper, experienced, informed, ready. He knows what an MP does. He's planned his response. But when it happens, he's testing his backup radio, checking if his neighbor's car works, trying to determine whether it's localized or widespread. He's not moving yet, he's validating. The opportunist, no training, no plan, but biased toward motion. He doesn't know what happened. He just knows something's wrong, and he's already out the door, already repositioning, already acting on assumptions he'll refine later. Who survives the first hour? The opportunist, because in a closing window, decisiveness beats accuracy. The prepper's advantage, knowledge, preparation, planning, becomes a liability if it keeps him immobile, and it often does. This is the question you need to answer for yourself. Would you act, or would you wait? Because if your answer involves gathering more information, testing your equipment, confirming the scenario, you've already failed. The first hour doesn't reward the person with the best analysis. It rewards the person willing to act on incomplete information and adjust in motion. Preparation without decisiveness is just expensive hesitation. The gear doesn't matter. The knowledge doesn't matter. What matters is whether you can override the instinct to confirm and replace it with the discipline to assume. Assume the worst. Move accordingly. Refine later. Because the informed individual who waits for certainty and the uninformed individual who never had it end up in the same place, behind. Bias toward movement beats bias toward certainty. And if that makes you uncomfortable, if it conflicts with the way you've trained yourself to think, that discomfort is the problem. In the first hour, your greatest vulnerability isn't what you lack. It's what you reveal. Every action you take broadcasts information. How fast you move, how prepared you are, whether you understand what's happening while others are still confused. And in a deteriorating environment, capability becomes a target. This is behavioral signaling. The person who moves decisively toward their vehicle while others are still staring at dead phones has just told everyone watching that they know something. The person who pulls out a backup radio or a hand crank flashlight in the first 15 minutes has advertised preparedness. The person who starts giving directions, organizing strangers, or taking charge has made themselves visible as someone with resources, clarity, or authority. And visibility in the first hour is a liability you cannot afford. The instinct, especially among the prepared, is to help, to step up, to take charge of a confused situation because you're one of the few people who isn't confused. This feels right. It feels moral. It's also strategically suicidal. Because the moment you demonstrate competence, you become a reference point. People will follow you. They'll ask you questions. They'll expect you to have answers. And if you have answers, they'll assume you have resources. If you have resources, you've just painted a target on yourself that doesn't wash off. Here's the discipline. Move quietly. Appear confused when observed. Never display competence in public space. If someone asks what's happening, you don't know. If someone asks whether your car works, it doesn't. If someone looks to you for leadership, you're just as lost as they are. This isn't deception for its own sake. It's operational security. Because in the first hour, the person who looks like everyone else but thinks differently has the highest survival probability. This is the gray man principle, applied to a collapsing system. You don't stand out, you don't lead. You don't help strangers unless helping them serves your positioning. You observe, you process, you move with purpose, but you never let that purpose become visible. Because the people watching you in the first hour aren't necessarily threats yet, but they're gathering information just like you are. And if you give them reason to remember you, to track you, to see you as capable or prepared, you've created a future problem. The segment of the population that adapts fastest to a grid-down scenario isn't the preppers, it's the opportunists. The people who already operate outside social norms, who already think in terms of advantage and exploitation. They're watching too, and they're very good at identifying who has something worth taking. You don't want to be on that list. Leadership is a liability unless you control the group. If you don't control the group, if you're just the person who stepped up because no one else did, you've taken on responsibility without authority, visibility without security, and expectation without leverage. That's a losing position. The first 60 minutes reward the observer, not the actor. The person who sees without being seen. The person who understands what's happening but doesn't announce it. The person who moves when no one's looking and blends in when they are. Anonymity is armor. And in the first hour, armor matters more than capability. Time is not linear in a collapse. The first 10 minutes of the first hour are worth more than the last 30, and the last 30 are worth more than the entire second hour. This is temporal leverage. The idea that every minute you delay action, the cost of that delay compounds. Not arithmetically, exponentially. Because as time passes, the environment changes. More people wake up to the reality. More confusion turns into panic. More positioning opportunities close. And once the majority catches up to what's happening, your advantage evaporates. Let's model this. 3 people, same knowledge, same resources, same plan. The only variable is when they act. Person A recognizes the situation at minute 5. They don't wait for confirmation. They leave the grocery store, get in their vehicle, and start moving toward home. The roads are still clear. Other drivers are confused, but not aggressive. There's no competition for space. Person A encounters minimal resistance and reaches their destination in the time it would normally take. Maybe faster, because traffic lights are out and they're not waiting. They're home, secured, and positioned before most people have even accepted that something is wrong. Person B recognizes the situation at minute 35. They spent the first 20 minutes testing devices, asking questions, trying to confirm. Then another 15 deciding whether to act. By the time they move, the roads are different. More people are driving erratically. Intersections are contested. There's a fender bender blocking a lane. A gas station has cars queued back onto the street. Person B has the same plan as Person A, but the environment has shifted. What should have been a 20-minute drive becomes 40, maybe more. They arrive stressed, delayed, and with less time to prepare for what comes next. Person C acts at minute 90. They waited to see how bad it would get. Maybe they convinced themselves it was temporary. Maybe they didn't want to overreact. By the time they move, the roads are impassable in places. Abandoned cars, crowds on foot. The grocery store they passed earlier is now a contested space. Person C has the same plan, the same destination, but the window closed. What was a 20-minute drive for Person A is now a multi-hour ordeal, if it's even possible. Person C is making decisions in a degraded environment, with fewer options, more threats, and no informational advantage. They're reacting, not positioning. Same plan, radically different survivability curves. The difference isn't capability, it's timing. This is why the belief that there's time to figure it out is fatal. There isn't. The first hour is a closing window, and every minute you spend figuring it out is a minute someone else is spending acting on it. The cost of losing the first 10 minutes is positioning. You're not where you need to be, and the routes to get there are harder. The cost of losing the next 20 is mobility. The environment is more contested, movement is slower, and you're burning time you won't get back. The cost of losing the final 30 is informational advantage. By then, enough people have recognized the crisis that you're no longer operating with clarity others lack. You're just another person scrambling. The compounding cost isn't theoretical, it's operational. Every delay cascades. And once the majority recognizes the crisis, the advantages you had, awareness, preparation, planning, stop mattering. Because everyone is competing for the same space, the same routes, the same resources. You're not ahead anymore. You're just in the crowd. The psychological trap here is the belief that decisive action requires certainty. It doesn't. It requires a bias toward motion and a willingness to accept that acting too early costs you less than acting too late. Because if you act at minute 5 and you're wrong, you've wasted time. If you act at minute 50 and you're right, you've wasted leverage. And leverage doesn't come back. The first hour isn't preparation time, it's execution time. And execution has a clock. The first 60 minutes aren't the start of your survival timeline. They're a diagnostic, a stress test, that reveals whether you have the cognitive architecture to operate in a collapsed system long term. And here's the uncomfortable part. If you fail the first hour, there's no redemption arc, no learning montage, no catching up. The advantages established in those first 60 minutes compound for months. The deficits do too. This isn't about gear or supplies, it's about decision speed, emotional regulation, and the ability to act without consensus. Those are the traits that matter when systems fail. And the first hour is when they're tested under conditions you can't simulate in a drill. Because in a drill, you know it's a drill. You know the stakes are fake. But in the real event, your mind is processing actual risk, actual uncertainty, actual consequences. And how you perform under that weight, how fast you decide, how clearly you think, how well you read the room, that's the data point that matters. The person who moved decisively in the first hour didn't just get home faster, they established positional advantage. They're secured while others are still in transit. They established informational advantage. They observed the behavioral patterns while others were still part of them. And they established psychological advantage. They acted with clarity when clarity was rare. And that confidence becomes a resource they carry forward. Every decision after that first hour is easier because they're operating from a position of relative strength. The person who hesitated entered a deficit they never close. They burn time they can't recover. They missed the window when movement was easy, when observation was possible, when positioning was available. And now, they're making every subsequent decision from behind. They're reacting to an environment others shaped. They're competing for resources others already secured. They're trying to establish safety in spaces others already claimed. The gap doesn't narrow, it widens. Because in a collapsing system, advantage compounds and disadvantage ossifies. This challenges the Hollywood narrative, the idea that you learn along the way, that mistakes teach you, that resilience means bouncing back. That's a story we tell ourselves because it's comforting. But it's not how collapse works. Collapse is not a curriculum. It's a sorting mechanism. It doesn't care about your potential or your intentions. It cares about what you did in the first hour when the system failed and you had to operate without it. The person who froze, who waited for consensus, who needed validation before acting, they've revealed something about themselves. Not that they're bad or weak, but that their cognitive wiring isn't built for this. And you can't rewire yourself under stress. You can't learn decisiveness while you're paralyzed by indecision. You can't develop emotional regulation while you're in the middle of a panic response. The first hour doesn't give you time to adapt. It just shows whether you already could. Here's the long tail implication. 6 months later, the person who acted decisively is operating from a foundation they built when it mattered most. They're not scrambling. They're not catching up. They're managing, adapting, surviving, because they started from a position of strength. The person who hesitated is still trying to recover from that first failure. They're resource poor, positionally weak, psychologically behind. They might survive, but they're surviving in deficit. And that deficit costs them in every decision, every interaction, every trade-off they make moving forward. The first 60 minutes are not the beginning of the crisis. They're the filter. The crisis doesn't create capability, it reveals it. And what it reveals in that first hour is whether you were already the kind of person who could operate in a system that no longer functioned. Not whether you could learn to be, whether you already were. This is not comforting. It's clarifying. Because the question isn't whether you're prepared, it's whether preparation made you capable or whether it just made you aware of how incapable you'd be under real conditions. The only way to know is to ask yourself honestly, what would I have done? Not what you'd like to think you'd do, not what your plan says you'd do. What would you have actually done in the first 10 minutes when nothing worked and no one had answers? If the answer is, I would have waited to be sure, you've already failed. If the answer is, I would have moved, then you understand. The first hour doesn't care about your stockpile. It cares about whether you're the kind of person who acts when action is still possible. And if you're not, the rest doesn't matter.